Today, in my presentation, I'd like to talk about the evolution of women's clothes throughout different art periods: classical, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, Romanticism, Impressionism, modern, postmodern, and contemporary eras. I was thinking where I'd want to exhibit the works of the eras I'm going to talk about, and after thorough research, I found the perfect place: Villa Vizcaya. According to the public encyclopedia Wikipedia, Vizcaya, now named Vizcaya Museum and Gardens, is the former villa and estate of businessman James Deering, and in the present day Coconut Grove neighborhood of Miami, Florida. I'd place my exhibited works in 3 different rooms. Each one would have 3 epochs in it. The first room, the library, is located near the reception where the guest of the show would find the booklets to the exhibition and some champagne. Champagne is a necessary attribute to a successful exhibition. Now back to the rooms. In the library, there will be the works of classical, medieval, and Renaissance art. After the library, the viewers will get to the entrance hall that will lead them to a big, full of sunlight inner court, where the works of Baroque, Romanticism, and Impressionism eras will be on a display. And finally, after the inner court, the guests will proceed to the entrance loggia. They will find works of modern, postmodern, and contemporary artists. Statue of Irene, which was made sometime between 14th and 68th AD by Julia Claudian. This is a Roman copy of a Greek bronze statue by Greek sculptor Kephisodotus. As it is said in the title, Irene is the personification of peace. The classical era brings to our mind an association with the Greek gods and their traditional outfits, tunics. Here, the figure of Irene wears a pappus, which is a heavy woolen garment formed by folding a large rectangle of cloth in half and attaching it at the shoulders. The pappus might trigger in viewers' mind the association with the statue of Athena in Parthenon, another example of masterpiece of classical period. Clothing in ancient Greece was loose-fitting, unlike the tight-fitting outfits worn by those people in Greece that Greeks considered barbarians. The pappus hides the silhouette of Irene. The body seems to be a long rectangular piece. In ancient times, women's body was covered because, unlike man's body, it was considered to be undeveloped. This baggy, loose-fitting tunic is hiding the undeveloped body. Moving on, I'd like to talk about the Middle Ages gown style. The Burgundian gowns were worn by most of the women in Western Europe in the 15th century. The medieval era, in my mind, draws pictures of beautiful castles and princes in it. The work that's shown right now is a work of Jacques de Longuyon, and it's entitled Vows of the Peacock. This is from the illuminated manuscript from around 1350s. It depicts nobles playing chess. As we can see, the women are wearing cotehardys, some with sightless surcoats, which are the outer tunics, and over them, some with Dalmatian sleeves, which are the sleeves that are very large and have this voluminous shape. Also, we can notice that the bright colors stand out in this work. In addition, I'd like to present the following image. This particular work is from the illuminated calendar from around 1410, and it is called Le Très Riche Heureux du Duc de Berry. This displayed illumination is for the month of April. Here is shown the noble men and women with Chateau de Dourdan in the background. The women wear fashionable high-waisted gowns with large Dalmatian sleeves, which we have already seen in the previous image. We also can see rolled hannons. The rolled hannons are the high pointed conical headdress that imitated the Gothic church spire, often with veils attached to them. And we noticed various styles of those hannons in this painting. This work of art especially reminds us of a stereotypical medieval world with its variety of patterns and high-waisted, tight-fitted dresses. Renaissance era began in Florence in Italy, but soon spread to the rest of Europe. I want to focus on the fashion side of this epoch. The style that came with this era was deeply influenced by late medieval fashions, but they had a strong personality of their own. And sometimes these fashions in England are referring to as Tudor or Elizabethan fashions because they were heavily influenced by the English monarchs, especially Elizabeth. So here we see the Armada portrait of Elizabeth I of England, and it was made by George Gower. At the beginning of the Renaissance, clothing started to become rounder and fuller. Big rounded collars are the part of the Renaissance fashion. Moreover, at this period, sleeves became rounded and had to be stuffed. The farthingale, which is according to Wikipedia, is a term applied to any of several structures used under Western European women clothing in the late 15th and 16th centuries to support the skirts into this desired shape was perhaps the biggest contribution of the Renaissance. During the entire Renaissance, the desired female figure was shifting to a silhouette of wide shoulders, a long narrow waist, a flat chest, and full hips, which was mostly modeled after the slight but ever so influential figure of Elizabeth I. Now let's talk about Baroque. At this time frame, women's clothing became much less restricting. Now tight-fitting corsets are very fashionable. Flowing lace collars replaced stuff ruffs, and talking about this particular painting, which is a painting made by Pompeo Bottani, a famous Italian painter, and the portrait lady is Maria Fyodorovna, and that would be surprising if I would mention any of the Russian persons depicted in the Western art. She was a tsaritsa, which means that she was king's wife, and she's a remarkable figure in Russian history. Not as huge as Elizabeth I for England, maybe, but still she was a mother of Alexander I and Nicholas II, very bright emperors of Russian Empire. So coming back to her outfit, she's wearing a dress with an open robe, overskirt, and petticoat, which is an underskirt, and a closed bodice. The overskirt is decorated with bows to match her skirt. The waist-like bodice appears to be cut to allow the sleeves of her chemise, which is referred to classic smock, that do not reach to the elbow to show. She wears her single large bow and frill to emphasize her décolletage. The overskirt is pulled up in a manner similar to that of a mantua earlier in the 18th century or late 17th century. Now let's switch to the Romantic period, which derives from a term used to describe a movement in an art that valued freedom of expression. In this period, women were pushed back into a more modest role, befiltering the weaker sex, often described as delicate, fragile, and decorative. The very important theme of that time was the angel in the household, and that is seen in the portrait of Josephine by the famous artist Francois Pascal Simon, also known as Baron Gerard, and the silky dress silhouette of Josephine suggests a weak, fragile body underneath. The waistline in this dress is much higher, and we can see an emphasis on short, puffy sleeves. But here, unlike in Armanda portrait, where Elizabeth has very voluminous sleeves that cover her whole hands, you can see Josephina's fragile arms. Once again, this element points to the idea of the fragile woman's body. And also, I want to point out that, again, we see a royal portrait that influenced the style, like she's not being portrayed as a regular young woman, but she's a royalty, and this is important in all the periods that we've seen so far. Now let's switch to the Impressionism era. Well, Impressionist artists loved to depict modern life as it was in that period, and it wasn't controversial, and it was something that's never been done. And at that time, there was a booming of the middle class, and they had money, and it's meant that they could spend that money. And now that the textile factories have also risen, and we're producing the fabrics and like clothes designs, now shopping has become a favorite leisure time for the middle class, and people would go out to theaters or other places and they would show themselves off. And this time, the idea of the weak, fragile body was in the past, and now we see the attention drawn to the femininity. We see the accented body curves, the sleeves become three-quarter sleeves, and the dress is very casual. Modern textile design in bright colors and bold patterns, impractical for anyone but the leisurely. It's not some complex design that would be hard to wear, rather a garment for an everyday life. Now let's move on to modernism. Well, the 1920s is the decade in which fashion entered the modern era. It was the decade in which women first abandoned the more restricting fashions of past years and began to wear more comfortable clothes, such as, skirts and trousers. Well, clothing fashions changed with women's changing role in the society. Now they had real jobs, and for example, here in the work of Wilhelm Heinrich Otto Dix, who was a German painter and printmaker, um, jour- journalist Sylvia von Harten is depicted, and we see the obvious um, change in this era. Like we see that her dress is much shorter, and the color is very bright, and she has this geometrical figured print on her dress. And well, here the concept has changed, and the clothes did not show a lot of femininity anymore. And then Dix didn't show physical femininity in one Harding, but rather Dix wanted to make a portrait concerned not with the outward beauty of a woman, but rather with her psychological condition. And I think he was able to do so, and this concept very much represents the modern period of art. Well, here's the postmodern era, and postmodern is in a movement during the 1960s and 1980s. The postmodernism has thought to contradict some aspects of modernism, and it includes in itself movements such as intermedia, installation, and conceptual art, multimedia, and particularly involving video art described as postmodern. It is very hard to find a work of art during this period that would show the clothing that is common for the era, but this period is known for the sex revolution and hippies, and this means that bright colors and daring styles of clothes are in trend. Here in the work of Francis Barry Tonic Moment Search, we see the futuristic avant-garde details, very short dress, rounded forms of sleeves, triangular skirt, anything crazy that's in your mind that possibly imagine is on a peak of the popularity in this era. In the next and last period that we're going to take a look at, it seems nearly impossible to find a clear depiction of fashionable clothes assigned to that period. But I think that a work of a contemporary Spanish artist, Jose Morella, does the job of showing a modern look very well. In his work entitled Tango, we see transparent green t-shirt and red pants worn by a woman. Once again, it's just a regular woman of young age, not a royalty, not a celebrity. And coming back to our topic, today, the women clothes has a lot of elements of transparency in it, And for example, the Gwyneth Paltrow a couple days ago wore a transparent dress on a red carpet